All right, what's up, guys? Nito here, and today I just wanted to talk about my 3.19 League starter and just kind of give you an update on how it's been going. I haven't had a ton of time to play because I was away this weekend, so really didn't get too far. As you can see, I'm only level 77 here, and we are playing a Galvanic Field Archmage Elementalist. And I'm just going to preface this by saying I would not recommend playing this build. I think Galvanic Field is the interesting skill, but ultimately it has a lot of quality of life issues that make it really difficult to play around it as a main skill. I can see it being somewhat decent as just like additional DPS in other types of lightning builds, like maybe a lightning conduit build, just for a single target DPS, but as a main skill, it's really lacking for quite a few reasons. First off, so if you don't know what Galvanic Field is, it is basically it puts a buff on you when you use it. So here it is right here. So I'm going to use it. You can see now there's a buff right here. And so the buff is going to give you some additional shock chance, but I'm Elementalist, so I have 100% chance to shock anyways from Shaper of Storms. And basically what happens is the next time I shock an enemy, it's going to apply the Galvanic Field, and it's going to essentially attach to an enemy like a brand. So let's see if I can show you real quick. So I have the buff. I'm going to use my Hydrosphere, and then you can see this big circle is the field. And you can see that right now the AoE looks pretty okay. However, you have to consider that this is with a 65% shock on the enemy. So the AoE is actually scaling based on the shock effect. So you can see there's a 65% shock on there. And I also have roughly 120% increased AoE on my tree right now. So without these, the AoE is super tiny. Like, it's really bad. Honestly, it's not good enough for what I would consider like necessary for a main clearing skill. And you can see that the other issue here is basically each time there's an enemy in the area, it's going to zap them at a fixed rate. So the issue is that the rate is fixed at 0.5. So it's 0.6 right now at this gem level, but it can go down to 0.5 seconds per enemy. So you can hit each enemy twice a second at best. 3 if you have a Hydrosphere in the area, and then you can chain off of the Hydrosphere. So you can hit the Hydrosphere once per second, you can hit the enemy twice per second, so 3 times total. You can also only fire a beam when there's multiple enemies. It only fires a beam every 0.1 seconds. So the issue there is that it really only hits 10 different enemies per second. So in really high density situations, you're not going to be hitting enough enemies, even with chains. So right now I have the +1 chain helmet enchant, and then I'm also using chain support, so that's with 3 chains. And even with that, it just feels pretty mediocre for clear. So like this is a good example, right? Like all of these enemies are like running into the area and they're dying, and they're just not dying as quick as they need to be, right? And especially when you have like a big rare mob that's soaking up a lot of the shocks, it's really hard to clear effectively with just Galvanic Field. And then the other issue is that it's hard to get the field to target the correct enemy. So, for example, actually this might work well. If I attach the field, so first off, the field is going to attach to whatever enemy you shock first. So if it attaches to the wrong enemy, then it's just going to fall on the ground after that enemy dies. So you can see the field is like stuck on the ground over here. It's not like a brand where it will reattach after it falls off. So like here again, you can see the field just kind of like got stuck on the ground, and now I have to kite the enemy into the field, which is not what you want to be doing, right? So it's really hard to target the correct enemy. And then the other thing is like if you're attached to a certain enemy, like a tankier enemy like this, and then you want to move the field, you actually can't. It'll stay on the enemy for I believe it's as long as the buff lasts, which is like 6 seconds by default. But it's just really hard to control and to get it to go where you want it to go. So because of that, I really can't recommend it as a build. Not only, I mean, well, certainly this build in particular, I can't recommend. This is an Archmage build with, ultimately, if I get all the gear and everything for it, like it should reach a decent amount of DPS and have quite a lot of mana. But I mean, Archmage is still just kind of mediocre in my opinion. Just defensively, there aren't that many good options because you're losing all of your auras, except for one, really. So you can use a blessing. So right now I have Wrath as a blessing. But I just don't think that Archmage is worth it compared to all of the other sort of buffs you can get through auras and things like that by reserving your mana. It's not quite a good trade-off in my opinion. You can get some pretty high damage numbers if you build it right. It just needs a lot of gear, and ultimately it was definitely not a good league starter choice. So like, I mean, like you can see these rares, like they're barely taking any damage because they just don't get hit often enough. Like the base damage on Galvanic Field is not high enough. Even with Archmage, it's just not high enough to really justify the hit rate against a single target. So anyways, I think this was pretty much a dead league starter. I ended up re-rolling off of this to a Lightning Conduit Necromancer, using corpses to shock enemies, and that's going much better. And I will hopefully have another video about that build soon. But I just wanted to showcase this build and talk about Galvanic Field and why you probably shouldn't use it as a standalone skill. I would maybe consider it as supplemental DPS, but not on its own. So anyways, thank you for watching, and see you next time.